Ah, Disney, the magical company that produced the movies that have never escaped my mind, but also bought half of Hollywood and turned the film industry into a parody of its former self. And their newest parody, Snow White, a reimagining of the 1937 animated classic, the literal first ever animated feature that was so expensive, given the scope of the new art form, that it forced Walt Disney to mortgage his home to pay for the film. Straight up, the guy was a badass. But to remake a movie that's known for pushing the boundaries of storytelling and filmmaking with soulless visuals, a bloated story, and shallow attempts of fixing unbroken political issues is downright cynical. It's weird to see a modern Disney remake with so much animosity for the original film it's based on, and it's blatantly obvious that it wanted to have the broad strokes of the story without understanding how the minutiae of the original was there for a reason. You guys know my one rule: cut the fat, and this film has fat of the most cuttable variety. The original fairy tale was only a few pages long. Walt Disney and his team looked to this story, saw the general themes of the story presented, took that, and extrapolated them naturally. So Snow White is endlessly kind to others? Well, let's have her innocence be the driving force of the movie. Why the prince immediately fell in love with her, why the dwarves immediately took pity on her, and why they listened to her when they wanted her out of their cottage. Why the queen managed to get a jump on her and poison her with the apple, and why in the end everyone mourned her after her death. Simple and to the point. Shockingly enough, not every movie needs to have its main character have an arc. A static character can work, and the best way to do this is to have their unshaken character impact other characters, which is exactly what the original film did. Does Snow White grow or change? No, but the dwarfs certainly do. And that's only because Snow White was the push they needed to get in the right direction and get their shit together. I'll go into more of that development later, but right now I'd like to focus on the very simple nature of the original. I'll keep asking this question until the day I die. What is the intrinsic value of complexity? What does adding additional things do? Because I'd encourage anybody who thinks of simplicity to instead think of it as focus. The writers of a simple story know what's important and what's not. Adding subplots and additional characters and more themes can bog down what could otherwise be a great story, and this movie is a perfect example of that. It wants to be the original film with extra steps to get there, while having an entire subplot of a rebellion against the queen. Okay, but why? What does that provide the story of Snow White? Nothing, because why would it? They pretend she has some profound arc of becoming a leader for her kingdom against the evil queen, but she already had a leadership role in the original that didn't require a whole bunch of extra steps. No, the reason it did this was to introduce a whole bunch of new characters to change something about the original that wasn't even broken to begin with. For years now, there's been plenty of criticism of the prince pulling up and hitting on Snow White out of nowhere, and in the end, he happens to stumble upon her coffin and kisses her after her death. Without the prerequisite understanding that this is a fairy tale and should be understand that its depiction of reality shockingly isn't going to be entirely accurate, I can kind of see the logic here. It doesn't exactly bode well that he'd do that, and in most cases, somebody who does that would be a massive creep. But there's a simple fix that could recontextualize things a bit without requiring a whole bunch of ludicrous world-building fuckery and introducing a whole additional cast of characters, nor padding the runtime. Just make it so Snow White and the prince already know each other. That way, it's two friends singing with each other early on, and when he appears at the end to kiss her, it could easily be rationalized as him having heard of her death and wanting to pay his respects. But no, they decided to make a whole bunch of new characters to fill the roster for the sake of it. The previously mentioned rebellion against the queen is a cool idea in a new interpretation of the original fairy tale, but this is supposed to be a remake of the Disney movie and directly ties itself to that. So don't come crying to me about my comparisons to the original, because they asked for it. But yeah, the new cast of characters is kind of lame. The prince has been turned into this rogue freedom fighter team leader, and Snow White first meets him when he's stealing bread from inside the palace. I wonder how he managed to get inside the palace undetected, but whatever. They really wanted to present him as some cool dude who has all these witty retorts and a tough personality, but it reads as the writer is not being confident in the source material. But yeah, everything about the rebellion is pretty redundant, which sucks since they spend a considerable amount of time dedicated towards it. They exist to support the new backstory of the stand-in for the prince, and like I said, none of that contributed anything of worth. It's entirely possible to have characters fall in love on sight. That's well within the scope of possibility for human beings to do, and characters in turn. One thing I'd like to touch on quickly is how the changes they made to the core conflict basically breaks all character motivations. In the original fairy tale, the queen was jealous of Snow White for being fairest of them all, a reference to her skin being white as snow. Obviously, that carries bad optics with it, in spite of it being tied to beauty standards of the time the story was written. The Disney version carried forth with that, but toned down the direct connection to her skin tone and instead made it more about her beauty in a broader sense. This version recontextualizes being fairest of them all as being morally fair, which, okay, that's something that needs to be broken down step by step because there's so much wrong with this concept. So in an attempt to be less, I guess, problematic with its messaging, they opted for something that actually works conceptually for Snow White, but doesn't work for the Queen. I get that Snow White in all versions of the story is a gentle soul who wants to do the right thing. That checks out. So why would the Queen care about being fairest of them all in that regard? Her literal first scene of shared dialogue with Snow White is her going on a tangent about how you gotta be a real dick of a ruler to keep people in line. As a villain, that works well enough. Of course, she's gonna be a bit indifferent to the suffering of others, but to try and spin that as something she apparently cares about is pretty odd. Like, if you want to be fairest of them all, just be fair. I don't know, like, you could just stop acting like a dick. That's the thing you can do in this position. Are we supposed to believe she's just some moron? Because that doesn't really help the stakes if our villain is a thundering dumbfuck who doesn't really understand that being fairest of them all just equates to being nice when she could easily do that, nor does her plan make sense, which I'll get into that in a second. So in the original, the Queen had a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is to have a loyal huntsman kill her while she's chilling in the forest. That isn't that bad of a plan, to be honest. If anyone starts asking questions, she could easily just say that he has no affiliation with her and that he's just some crazy nutcase. She's blameless, and with this deal being made in secret, there's no room for people to find out about her plot. But after the huntsman was not able to go through with her plan because she's just too innocent to harm, the Queen decided she needed to do it herself, creating a disguise and a poison apple to take care of her, and that plan succeeded. Now, this all makes sense. Why would she want to have multiple people in the know about her plans? Doesn't that run the risk of potential instability in her kingdom? People could easily try to fight back, people trying to undermine her, anything. Keeping things close to the chest is not just effective, but it also serves a pretty cool purpose for presentation. If you haven't seen the original Snow White in a while, please watch it again. The Queen is pretty fucking sinister with a very eerie screen presence due to her quiet and often reserved performance and design. But in the remake, not only does she have a musical number which undermines the eerie, quiet presence of her character, not only do the lyrics do fuck all to advance any part of her character and sound like they were written by an AI, but she decides to send her fucking army to go after Snow White when she's trying to pull off a quiet assassination, which, funny enough, becomes even more of an issue by establishing how well-known and loved Snow White was within this kingdom, basically breeding the potential for an insurrection. At least in the original, we had to infer the existence of a larger kingdom beyond what we saw, since animating humans was super expensive at the time, so it wasn't bad enough that they made her send an army to kill Snow White. I guess they wanted to make it even more of a problem by doubling down on Snow White's popularity in her own kingdom. Also, I want to take on how annoyed I was seeing the Queen take on her disguise as the old hag, then revert to her looking normal afterwards, because apparently this fairy tale needed a whole revolution to take place to pay off lip service to an arc. The point of the Queen becoming an old hag from a thematic perspective is supposed to convey that she was so obsessed with surface-level beauty that she lost it in pursuit of being the best, and that came crashing down on her. But I guess the old hag getup was strictly a temporary disguise instead of anything deeper. Thanks, Disney. But I guess having the sole motivating factor for the villain, a character explicitly designed to be wrong, being something as vain as jealousy over appearance isn't modern enough. Weird. Shockingly enough, villains are usually people with pretty fucking twisted lines of thinking. Not like I've made endless videos about villains with fundamentally fucked up views on the world and views about themselves and others, and how they're not supposed to be rational, so why are we trying to make changes to something that's supposed to be a cautionary tale? And don't get it twisted, I'm not trying to be some kind of rage-baiting grifter on the grounds of some political bullshit. This movie isn't bad because of the woke. It's bad because of out-of-touch studio executives who listen to bad faith service-level criticisms, moralizing art as if that isn't an inherent fallacy, taking that and creating a remake that, quite literally, no one asked for. Rachel Zegler isn't bad as Snow White because of her political opinions, because fucking obviously that's stupid. Neither is Gal Gadot for being bad as the evil queen for hers. Zegler is bad as Snow White because there was no clear direction for her, wanting her to be both the character from the original and also some kind of powerful leader or queen who wants to take over the kingdom and do all these incredible things and fix the system. Nice work, Disney. And Gal Gadot is bad because she can't act or sing, and this film tortures us by having her failing at both. You don't watch a Gal Gadot performance, you survive it. And you know what? Fuck it. My hot take is that the original Snow White isn't nearly as regressive or problematic as people make it out to be. People point to Snow White working in the kitchen and cleaning up after the dwarves as some kind of propaganda to keep women subservient to men. And holy shit, you couldn't have a worse read of this film if you tried. She flees from an attempted murderer and stumbles into a house that she assumes is inhabited by only children, since all of the furniture is miniature and there's a mess everywhere. So being the empathetic person she is, she cleans up to make sure that once the kids come home, they return to a clean space. She later learns that the dwarves live there, and she becomes almost like a motherly figure to them, something she never had. She basically broke a toxic cycle of abuse by being a pure of heart person to such a degree that she managed to make 7 grown men completely change how they act. This is a story of finding another family with these dwarves. Now, my honest question is this: is being a homemaker inherently problematic? Nobody bats an eye at Jake Sully or the Mandalorian for taking on fatherly positions, so why is it too far for a woman to take a motherly role? Never confuse kindness for weakness. Kindness itself is a form of strength that most media won't bother to cover with the full nuances and earnestness of storytelling from the time of the original Snow White. I know the actual reason for this is people don't want to revisit movies from their childhood, so instead they poke holes at media they aren't familiar with for the sake of feeling morally superior. And frankly, I can't think of any bigger disrespect to art than to brush it off as worthless because of their age. Do yourself a solid and rewatch older movies that you might not remember all too well, because you'll be surprised at how great they often were. Hollywood needs to learn that lesson, but it starts with the audience. Anyways, that's all I've got. Like, comment, subscribe, join my channel memberships because I want to steal your hard-earned money, and join my Discord server. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.